Hello and welcome to another video, and welcome to the video that I have been looking forward to filming since the long list for the Women's Prize for Non-Fiction was announced way back in, what was it, March? And since I decided actually I was going to attempt to read most, if not all, of the long list, I've been looking forward to this video since then, and I'm quite excited. When the long list was announced for this year's Women's Prize for Non-Fiction, I'd already read 3 of the books. And while some of the other books on the list are quite long, and I hadn't read them, some of them are actually really short, so I thought, you know what, I actually might be able to do this. And I didn't rush, I took my time. Some of the books I couldn't get hold of for a really long time, and I didn't think I would manage to do it, but last week I did manage to finish the last book. Okay, one of them I didn't actually finish, we'll get to that, but I managed to at least give a go to all of the books on the list, which means that I can actually film a video before the long list is announced. So, a few stats for you. There were 16 books on the long list, 6 made it through to the short list. I have read in total, like the complete book, 15 of the books. 15.5, because I read half of one. But the winner will be announced this Thursday, the 12th of June, which is in just a few days' time, and I'm very excited. Before the long list was announced, I didn't do a predictions video. And maybe I should have done, because I'd already read 3 of the books that made it to the long list. And there were a couple as well that I kind of thought, I think this might end up. I hadn't read them, but I think this might be the kind of thing that might end up on the long list. And actually quite a lot of the books, I'll mention them as we go through. I feel like I should have done a predictions video. And if I do one next year, it's because I got really excited by how many I thought were going to be on the list. So I'm probably going to fail in future and not be able to get any of them, but maybe I might actually do that. There was one book which, before the long list was even announced, I thought, not only is this book going to be on the long list, it's going to be shortlisted, but it's going to win. And I said this to everybody, and that is The Story of a Heart by Rachel Clark. Do I still think it's going to win? Because it is on the shortlist. You'll just have to wait until the end of this video to find out. But that was my prediction for, I 100% think that this book is going to win. And then when it ended up on the shortlist, I felt very smug. But that's what I thought then. So what do I think now? Before I tell you about my top 15, I'm going to tell you about the one book that I did not finish, and that is Tracker by Alexis Wright. I put a hold on this at the library, and it took ages for it to come in. There's only one copy. It's really hard to get hold of. And I got about halfway through. It was a really slow read for me. I wasn't reading it very quickly, and I had lots of reservations, so I sent it back, and I wasn't able to get it back again to finish it. It's about Tracker Tillmouth, who's a very charismatic Australian Aboriginal leader, political thinker, just an amazing man, quite grumpy, really interesting, not particularly, what's the word, nice, or a likeable person all the time, but really, really interesting. And the book is essentially made up of interviews with Tracker and with people who knew him. They're often, and this is the thing that I found quite a problem with reading, they're often like verbatim sections, just exactly what he said and other people, and some of them are quite meandering, and I found it really hard. Like I found it quite difficult to read at times. Quite a difficult narrative style. I thought the content, what it was about, was really compelling. The style, not so much. So I never actually read anything else by Alexis Wright, so I don't know if that's just maybe her style, but it was just big quotes from people, so I don't know if it's necessarily, I don't know. Anyway, I didn't get to finish it, so I thought it would be really unfair to include it in this video, and I also don't think I'm going to finish it. I wasn't compelled enough to continue, especially with the difficulties of getting hold of it from the library. So I won't be finishing it. That's why I'm filming this video now. So I only have a top 15. So let's get on with it. This is my top 15 for the Women's Prize for Non-Fiction 2025. This is my ranking, just what I thought of the books. Your list will probably be very, very different. I will tell you the order that I've put them in. So we're starting with number 15, right to the book that I think should win, and I will tell you if I thought this book was going to be on the long list before it was announced. This is like my predictions video all rolled into one. I will be honest though, some of these I didn't see coming, others I did see coming. Yes, I'll tell you my ranking, I will tell you whether I thought it was going to make the long list, and I will tell you whether it did actually make the actual judges' shortlist as well, so you've got all of the information before the results are announced on Thursday. So, at number 15 on my list is the only book in this list that I would probably say I hated. The rest of them, I think, are brilliant, and I will caveat the rest of this list by saying This was so difficult to do. So difficult because all of these books, most of them, are absolutely amazing and all of them deserve to be there. And it was so hard. Like some of them I'm picking on so much with very, very fine, minute, tiny details. Anyway, it's really difficult. Number 15 is Autocracy Inc. The Dictators Who Want to Run the World by Anne Applebaum. I have heard very good things about her writing and I would really like to read other books by her. I've been recommended quite a few already. I am, I've got to be honest, baffled that this book is on a long list. Just so baffled. This book is essentially about how autocratic states are not what you think they are. They are not how they used to be a long time ago. They're no longer isolationist. You know, we think of states like North Korea as being really insular and isolated, but North Korean troops are in Ukraine fighting for Russia. So they're no longer isolationist. What they do now is they stick together. They get allies around the world. They fight each other's wars and they are working together to undermine democracy. That's essentially what this book is about. Other reviews that I've read of this have said that this book isn't really for people who aren't into politics. If you're into politics, this is probably great. But I disagree with that because I think if you're really into politics, then you already know everything that's in this book. There's nothing new. There's nothing groundbreaking. She's not revealing anything spectacular. I think maybe, I'm really struggling to know who this book is for. I think maybe if you're kind of interested in politics, but you don't really know much about international politics and what's going on, but maybe you want to know a bit more, then this book, I guess, is a really short primer introduction. It has a very kind of, not just pro-American view, but pro the idea that it's a good thing that America is the most powerful country in the world and anyone trying to undermine that is a despot, which I think is an opinion. It's a great drag queen name, an opinion. Anyway, I hated this book. Moving on. Number 14 is another book I didn't hate, but I really didn't like very much, and that is The Peep Show, The Murders at 10 Rillington Place by Kate Summerscale. Again, I'm quite confused as to why this book is... It was well written. I am confused why it's on the long list though. But this is about a serial killer and serial rapist who murdered vulnerable women by, mostly we think, pretending to help them with abortions. It's also about the journalist, the male journalist, who investigated the murders. There were, before I read this, there were a few claims that this book also looks at the press and the kind of the press and public obsession with true crime, which I don't really think it does. It doesn't delve into that very deeply at all. It does talk about the fact that they were obsessed and the way that the press represented these women, but it doesn't really delve into it at all. It doesn't really look at the modern obsession with true crime either, which had been suggested that it did. So maybe this book has maybe suffered a bit from my expectations from what other people have said. But I also think that this book is really essentially just about, it's just about men raping and murdering women. And I think it's really great that she gave a name and a voice to the vast majority of the women in the book. But I think still, ultimately, it was just quite a sensationalist book about murder and I just don't care. So book number 13 on my list, I promise it's going to get more optimistic and cheerful. Well, maybe not cheerful with some of the books coming up, but I'm going to like some of them a bit more. So number 13, now none of these books so far are on the judges' shortlist, and this one is no exception. This was one of the books that I'd already read before the long list was announced. I think if I had done a predictions video, I would not have put any of these books so far that I've mentioned on that video, and actually I wouldn't have put this book even though I had already read it. The book is Wild Thing, A Life of Paul Gauguin by Sue Prideaux. Now I think this book, it's probably great if you know Gauguin's work. Now I am not a huge fan of his art, it's just not really my kind of thing, it's not really the style that I like. I love art, I love books about art and books about artists, so I was hopeful that I would like this, but I think one of the faults of this book, one of the things that kind of lets it down, it's a brilliantly written book. Like, all of these books are really great. I'm really picking on them, but I think one of the things the book does is that it makes not just passing reference, but quite big references to some of his artworks in terms of how they reflect the life that he was living at specific times, and how it kind of interacts with his life and how his life is exhibited in the work. But then it doesn't include the artwork in the book. And I know that it does make a book more expensive if you put loads of artwork in, but some of the art in the book is only given a passing mention, whereas others that we talk about in great detail are not in the book. And I kept on having to stop my reading to Google what the pictures were like, because if you're talking about a work of art in such detail, you kind of need to know what it looks like. And I don't really like reading a book where I have to keep pausing to check other facts and to check other things online. So I thought that was one thing that just really didn't work for me. And another thing that didn't work is I think it starts off with an introduction where it kind of talks about how, the life that you thought you knew, like the Gauguin that you thought you knew, that's wrong actually. And here I've got the receipts to show you that actually it's completely different. But the problem is I knew nothing about Gauguin, so that whole premise that the book is built on, that it's like this completely new retelling, I felt like I wasn't taken on that journey because I don't know anything about him to begin with. And I did find out some very interesting things about him and his relationship with Van Gogh and the kind of friendship. Like the fact that Paul Gauguin was nearly arrested for murdering Gogh, despite the fact that he wasn't dead. Anyway, it is really interesting. I just don't think it was really written in a very compelling way. And not for a general reader, and I do love art, so I don't know if I count as a general reader. What even is that? But yeah, I wasn't particularly compelled by the book. Okay, let's move on to book number 12. This might be possibly a controversial choice because it's only at number 12 out of 15. This is a book that if I had done a predictions video, I would have put on that predictions video as probably being quite high up and probably making it to a shortlist. It is on the shortlist. It's only at number 12 on my list, and that is Raising Hair by Chloe Dalton. I think this book probably suffered for my expectations, in that the book is completely different from what I actually thought it was. I'm actually quite surprised that this book is actually quite this high up in my rankings, and I'm surprised it made the shortlist. I know lots of people love it though, so this is probably quite controversial. Anyway, Chloe Dalton is a political advisor who spent most of her life living in London and travelling around the world, really involved in the kind of, busy, hectic chaos of politics. And she also has a house in the countryside. And during the pandemic, she was living in her house in the country and essentially finds a baby hare abandoned in the middle of a path and eventually takes care of and raises that hare. At first I was a little bit worried about this book because I thought it wasn't going to acknowledge at all what a really bad idea it is to not only feed wild animals, which in some cases is okay, in some cases it's not, because then they come to rely on the fact that you have food and then they just come to you for food rather than actually getting food anywhere else. But also raising a wild animal. I thought it wasn't going to reflect on that, but it does, and I think it does it really well, and I was very, very happy about that because, I think her anxiety about whether she should do it or not, I think came across really well, and I really liked that. I thought that this book was going to be more about kind of the impact that had on her life, on raising that hare, and the impact that had on her life. And I thought it was going to be really a reflection on the impact that nature has on our lives. And it isn't. It's just about a hare. I think she does briefly touch on her life and the changes she kind of went through at the time because of the hare, but ultimately that's quite surface level. It's almost like she doesn't want you to know much about her life and she's kind of holding the reader at a bit of a remove, which I guess works for a book that's about a hare. But I didn't think it was. I thought it was going to be about her. But it's just about a hare. If you love hares, I guess you'll love this book. This, after all, is just a list of my preferences. And I think you'll see when we get to the shortlist what my preferences are. And this is where I might say something controversial, but it turns out that I actually prefer people rather than hares. Sorry. Anyway, let's move on to number 11. Number 11 is a book that I thought might be longlisted for the Women's Prize for Non-Fiction. If I'd done a predictions video, I would have predicted this one. I did read it and I wanted to read it. I was very excited. I didn't think it would make the shortlist, and it has made the judges' shortlist. It hasn't made mine though, because it's a number 11, but that is 1,000 Threads by Nena Cherry. Nena Cherry is a Swedish, British, American all of those things, I think musician. I have been a huge fan of Neneh Cherry since I was, 8 or 9 when she released her first single. A huge crush on her. I think I still do in a way. And this is her autobiography because it's just the story of her life in music, and her life kind of growing up in a musical and artistic family and what that is like. I found it very interesting, very engaging. She did reflect quite a lot on her own failings and the failings of people around her, but also with a lot of love and warmth. Ultimately though, I don't have a lot to say about it. It was fine. And I think that's why it isn't really any higher up, because I think unless you're a really big fan of Neneh Cherry, this is the problem I think I have with autobiographies, rather than memoirs, which do really look at a very specific aspect of someone's life, and they might tell the story of your whole life but through a very specific lens, like some of the ones that are going to come later. And when it's just an autobiography of a famous person and their life, I think unless you're a really big fan, it's great. Like, it's a really well written book. I mean, all of these books are great. I'm just like picking on really minute details, but ultimately I thought it was fine. I am surprised, based on what else is on the shortlists, or what has been left out rather, that it's made it to the shortlist, just because I think some of the other books for me were a little bit more compelling. But actually, I think the balance of the shortlist is actually quite good, and you've got to think about that as well. So anyway, moving on. That was number 11 on my list. Number 10 is By the Fire We Carry, The Generations Long Fight for Justice on Native Land by Rebecca Nagle. This is one of 2 books that are about law that are on the long list. I had not heard of this book before the long list was announced. I think it had been out in the US for quite a while, possibly for a whole year, but it wasn't really something that had come to my attention in the UK, so I wouldn't have predicted it. It's not on the final judges shortlist, and it's a number 10 on my list. So this is about the, as it says, generations long fight for tribal land and sovereignty in Oklahoma. Now, that is not something I know anything about, so this book was completely new information to me. It also tells the story of some up-to-date, very contemporary legal battles and acts of resistance from Indigenous communities in the past. This book was really interesting to me because I am a massive geek when it comes to law. Ultimately though, I didn't really think it was a strong enough narrative for all readers who want to understand why you would be talking about someone who's a murderer and trying to stop them from getting the death penalty based on whether they were on native land or not, and why you're talking about a child abuser. Like, if you're really into law, those little intricacies are quite interesting, but whilst it is interesting, I feel like the narrative wasn't strong enough to kind of draw together why really people would care about these different things. So I liked it, but ultimately I just didn't think it was compelling enough to go any higher in my list. So we are now up to number 9. We're up to another book which I had read before the long list was announced. I thought it would make the long list. I would have predicted it because I think it's a great book, and it has made the judges' shortlist, and that is What the Wild Sea Can Be, The Future of the World's Oceans by Helen Scales. This book, when I was going through my list, I did originally put in my own shortlist, so this is how much this has changed just over me kind of tussling with it. All of these books from here on in, some of them are so close to each other, and I don't know how I could differentiate between the different books in terms of why one would be better than the other. But this book was really quite difficult, so it's moved around a lot, but I'm quite happy with the place that we've left it. So it's at number 9 in my list. This is another book that does exactly what the title suggests. It's a history of the oceans. It's a history of the damage that has been done to the oceans by humans, and also what we can do to reverse that damage. I think ultimately it is a very optimistic book, but I don't think it's very compellingly written. That's the only reason that it's slightly further down my list, because I really struggled. So I struggled with it at first, really to kind of get into the story that she was telling. And that's the thing I think about non-fiction, is that you are telling a story, you're telling a narrative, and I think sometimes that gets forgotten. And it wasn't a particularly compelling narrative at first. It was a bit like, why are you telling me all these different facts? I really struggled, but one of the reasons I think I struggled is because I was listening to it on audio, and there's a lot of information at the start. So I switched to the physical book, managed to really get into it, and then I think I switched between then the audio and the physical book. There were some chapters though that I found less engaging than others, because there were the chapters about essentially microbes. Turns out I'm more interested in humans than microbes. Now I understand why I should be really interested in microscopic organisms. And I understand their importance to the ocean now, thanks to Helen Scales. But I did struggle to care at some points about the amount of detail she was going into. I struggled. So that's just the only thing, because I think I did kind of, my attention waned in the middle of the book with some of the chapters. But it's so well written and it's just brilliant. And I'm really excited that it was on the long list. I'm not quite sure I wouldn't have put it, I mean, I haven't put it on the short list, but you know, the judges know what they're doing. Number 8 in my list is the second law book in this list, and that is Sister-in-Law, Fighting for Justice in a System Designed by Men by Harriet Wistrich. This book, I know a lot of people, I've heard a lot of people talk about this and say, people who haven't yet read it, and say, I don't want to read a book about law. And interestingly, this book was in, so the university that I work for, it's in the law library, so it's definitely a book that I think lawyers would find interesting, but this book is essentially a memoir. Now, Harriet Wistrich, way back in, I think the book starts in the 80s, I think, and she is a campaigner for women's rights and minority rights, and she decides to train to be a solicitor so that she can do more. Each chapter really takes you through her story, but about the stories of these different people or different groups of people, and how the law has really screwed them over and really prevented justice from happening. I think the impression that I got from the book, maybe from some assumptions made from the title, is that it was all about women's stories and about how women's lives impacted by the law. And that's actually not what it is. It is about women and minorities. So some of the stories that, or some of the people whose lives she has been involved in and cases that she's worked on include people like John Charles de Menezes, which, if you don't know, he is a completely innocent Brazilian man who was killed by police in Britain after the terrorist bombs, July 7th, 2007, because he didn't look British. So there's a chapter about him. There's a chapter about Stephen Lawrence and about his family, who, again, this is a huge case in Britain, but if you don't know, was a young black man who was murdered, and the police basically didn't investigate and covered up, and for a very, it's a very long going thing in Britain, and lots of law we have now has been changed because of the Stephen Lawrence fiasco. But she was involved in that as well, so I think the book doesn't really give an impression about the breadth of cases that she's been involved in, and about women's rights as well and other minorities. It's just really infuriating, really anger-inducing, really frustrating, incredibly well written. I thought it was brilliant. This is another one that was originally in my shortlist, and I kept on moving it around because the other ones I felt like had stayed with me, or I had more to say, or I don't know. It was so difficult to decide. This did not make the judges' shortlist, which I guess I kind of see why. Okay, don't be bitter about it, Jem. Okay, so the last book that didn't make it through to my shortlist, although it did originally, and I kept moving it around, and it's so hard, I don't know, but it did make it through to the judges' shortlist. This is a book that I wouldn't have predicted because I didn't really know about it, but it is Agent Zoe, The Untold Story of Fearless World War II Resistance Fighter Elżbieta Zawaka, and it's by Claire Mully. This is a great history book. I mean, it's really, really great. It does exactly what the title suggests. It's about a Polish resistance fighter and spy. It's a great story of misogyny during the 20th century. It tells her story through her own words, documents she wrote, and interviews with people who knew her. Now, initially, I did rate this book quite highly. I did that for the content and the research, sort of, but not necessarily because of the writing style, because I think I read some reviews where people said, oh, this book could have done with editing. I feel like it reads like a book that's been over-edited, because there are bits where it's just a kind of list of facts that aren't really fully developed about why you're telling us this, and there's lots of information and lots of people and lots of places, and the story, the narrative almost gets lost in all of this information. And it feels, I don't know if it was, but it feels like it's just been edited to within an inch of its life. It could have been longer, this book. I would have read a much longer book. I also felt like there was a bit of difficulty with the use of oral history. So I've read a few books recently, and I've definitely reviewed a couple on this channel where I've talked about this. But when you're doing oral history, which is basically interviewing people about things that happened in the past, you have to really heavily acknowledge the fact that they are telling you stories from their past. Their memories might not be correct. They might not be accurate, and they might also be telling you how they want to remember, or because they've realised a legacy that does or doesn't exist. And an acknowledgement of that is really important in a history book. And I've read quite a few recently where that wasn't the case, and I think this is one of them. And this is a very minor point, but it just needed to be acknowledged that a lot of the narrative has come from people's memories. And it's really important to tell these stories and to tell Elzbieta's story. But you need to also acknowledge that a lot of this information is coming from people who might not necessarily accurately remember everything. There was a little bit of, I think, but just like not quite enough for me. And that's why I say like this book could have been twice as long, because you could have had all of that in there. You could have had so much more information. But it's a great book. Like, I understand why it's shortlisted. I like I said, I didn't know about it beforehand. I wouldn't have predicted. I thought it would probably make the shortlist, and it has. So I'm quite happy about this. So now we're up to my shortlist of what I would have shortlisted if I were in charge. I think though that when you're making a shortlist, and I guess when you're making a long list as well, that you have to think about the balance of the stories, the balance of the books, and how they kind of complement or don't complement, or how they kind of work together. And that's a really complex thing, which I think sometimes as readers we can just get frustrated that our favourite hasn't got through to the shortlist. But I kind of understand why the shortlist is as it is, and I think it's a really good balance, so I'm actually quite happy with it. But this is my shortlist. You will have probably been able to work out, if you know the long list, that only 2 of the books that are actually shortlisted by the judges are in my top 6. So I kind of agree with what they've done. All these books are great. Anyway, at number 6, this book wasn't originally in my shortlist, but like I said, when I was like working it out, it eventually moved down and down, so it's my number 6. But that is Embers of the Hands, Hidden Histories of the Viking Age by Elena Barakoff. Now obviously, I'm a historian, so there are 3 history books in this top 6, but in my defence, this is not my time period. I don't know anything about Viking history. This book, as you can imagine from the title, explores the history of Viking Age Britain. Now I'm bunny earing that because Viking Age is a bit of a ridiculous term. She explores, I think, Elena Barakoff really well in this book why Viking is a ridiculous term, and kind of explains really well kind of what it means, what exactly she's talking about, before delving into the history. And what she does, because of the time period it is she explores this history through objects, because most history we have of this period is archaeological. And she looks at really specific objects and how people would have interacted with them, or what we know about how people would have interacted with them, and how it would have impacted their lives, and what it tells us about them as a culture and a community. And it was so enriching, this book. It was just so engaging. I think she explains the history really well in a very short book, but I think without patronising. I obviously absolutely love history, and I will happily read any history, but I didn't know anything about this time period. But I didn't feel like she was talking down to me at any point, like, here you go, simple people, here's an explanation. I just thought she did a really, really good job, and I really loved it. So at number 5 on my list is a book that I think I had vaguely heard about before. I'm sure I had before the long list was announced, but I don't think I would have predicted it because I didn't really know very much about it. And it is on the judges' shortlist as well as my own. That is Private Revolutions, Coming of Age in a New China by Yuan Yang. This is the story essentially of 4 women who were born in the 80s and 90s in China. It's about their lives, it's about growing up, trying to get educated, trying to find a job, get married or not get married, have kids or not. And it's about how the Chinese state impacts that, how political decisions impact their lives and what they can and can't do due to various different rules. There's a couple of criticisms that I've seen, and one aspect of it I agree with and one I really don't. One aspect that people say is that the way that it's written is that you've got these 4 different stories of these 4 different women. And some people say, I can't tell the difference between these women because they're all the same. And like the way it's written, where you've got 4 different sections, and then in each section takes you through a different aspect of their lives. And it goes quite quickly, sort of from one woman to another, like in a short paragraph and then another section. And that kind of style makes it quite difficult to separate the voices. I don't agree that these women are all the same. I think it's actually deeply offensive. They are not all the same. They're very, very different people, and they have very different aspirations and very different ideas about their own lives and what they want to do and the impact that the government has had on their lives. They're completely different. But I do agree that the way it kind of goes backwards and forwards between the different women, it takes you a while to think, okay, whose head am I in? Because obviously, if you don't understand the geographical areas, just naming an area, you can quite easily forget who you're talking about. And also, I think that because the story kind of moves on in chunks, sometimes you kind of forget, oh, what were they doing last time, that particular person? So I wonder if the narrative could have been structured differently in a physical book to make it just a little bit more readable. I listened to it on audio, and I think that probably helped. I can see why it might be difficult, but the audio has different narrators for the different women. So you very quickly kind of get into, okay, whose story am I in again? I don't know if telling each story separate would make sense. Maybe. One of the things that I found most compelling about this book is, again, something that I've seen criticised by people. And this is why I was talking about kind of the balance of books, because I think we've got a really good balance in the actual shortlist, probably less so in my own shortlist. But one of the things that people have said about this book is that the women in are just ordinary. Like, there's nothing particularly special about them. You know, they're not like, we're not learning about abject poverty in China and what it's like for really, really, poor people from really rural areas. And we're not hearing about incredibly successful women who are incredibly successful businesswomen or politicians or artists or whatever. That these are just like for ordinary women. But people say that like that's a bad thing. And I think that there is a tendency in books about women that I think that Women's Prize, is trying to counteract. And that is, we don't need to just tell you stories of our absolute misery. Although there is one on my shortlist, which we'll get to, which is like that. It's just a story of someone's absolute despair and misery. But we don't also need to tell you just about incredibly successful women. There's one of those books on the shortlist as well. That's what I think about maybe the balance of this, the actual judges' shortlist and why it's so good. But women are allowed to just be ordinary. Women are allowed to just be average. Like, what is wrong with just being average and ordinary and just getting on with your life? And that's what this book is about. And that's why it really infuriates me when people say, oh, this book's just about ordinary women. Like, yes, what's wrong with ordinary women? This is what this prize should be celebrating, is the achievements of ordinary women. That's not to say, and we'll get onto that women can't tell stories about successful women or people who haven't been able to achieve things, or the stories of men. We will get onto this. But this book is great for that reason. It is wonderful because it just tells the story of ordinary women. And that's a great thing. That is a wonderful thing. Okay, I've had my little rant. There's going to be another rant coming up. Number 4 on my list didn't make it through to the shortlist. I would not have predicted this book because I hadn't heard of it before the Longlist was announced. I moved this book around so much. It originally wasn't in my shortlist, but then the more I spoke about it to myself, the more I thought about it, the higher up I bumped it. But anyway, number 4 on my list is Why Fish Don't Exist, a story of loss, love and the hidden order of life by Lulu Miller. I think that, I know this is going to be controversial because I know lots of people didn't like this book, but I think that this is a really interesting book. I think it's really unusual, very compelling. It is essentially a book in several parts. It's several parts kind of put together, or several stories rather. It's Lulu Miller's story, her life growing up, interested in science. She's a science writer and podcaster, I should say. And it's really just about her life and how science interweaves with that. But then it's about how she messed up, caused the breakup of her relationship, a long-term relationship, something that she really found a lot of foundation in. A lot of, it was able to, that relationship was really it was able to centre her, that's what I'm trying to say. It was really able to just be a really pivotal moment in her life, in this relationship. And it's about how that then causes this kind of spiral into despair, this existential dread. That's quite a normal memoir so far. But then it's about how, in this despair, she's trying to find somebody to use as an inspiration, as an example. And she hits upon the taxonomist, David Starr Jordan, who, long dead now. it's an interesting person to get into, but basically he's a taxonomist, so he would go to exotic places and capture fish, put them in little jars and label them and name them all. And then big disaster happened, all of his little jars all got destroyed and all of his life's work was gone. But he just carried on and started again. And I think she kind of thought, well, this is a great example for how, you know, literally everything gets destroyed. How do you deal with it? Pick yourself up, carry on. But then there's a twist, and it turns out he's not quite the person she thought he was. But she thought, this is a bit questionable. I'm sure nothing else could. Oh no, another twist. Turns out he's even worse than she thought he was. And then just when she's settling into that, she's not happy with it, but still another twist. Oh, he's a wrong'un. He really is a wrong'un, this guy. I won't tell you what the twists are, but it's kind of about how you deal with the fact that this person who you were kind of, not that you know them, but you're using them as an inspiration for your life, and you're really kind of using them as an example of how to get through adversity. And then it turns out, like I said, that they're wrong. And you know, what do you do? It turns out, it sounds really cliched. It makes the book sound bad, but really it turns out that the inner strength is within you. I mean, it's not really naff, haven't I? No, it's a really good book. It's really, really great. It's very moving. It's very emotional. It's very gripping. It's very well written. I actually really love this book. I think initially I did give it 5 stars. I think I bumped that down because I realised that was just me being emotional about the book, but I really liked it. Okay, so we're on to my top 3. My number 3 book is a book that I hadn't read before it was longlisted. I would have predicted, because I had heard of it and I had heard amazing things about this book. Everybody loved it. So I would have predicted that it would be longlisted. I thought it would be shortlisted, but the judges did not shortlist it. I have, in my heart, shortlisted this book at number 3 in my list, and that is Ootlin by Jenny Fagan. This is a memoir of Jenny Fagan's life, and it's about her life growing up in the care system in Scotland. This book is horrific. Like, there's no other word to describe it. Like, her descriptions of what she had to go through, just when you think they couldn't get any worse, it gets more horrific. And then more horrific. And then I just kept putting this book down and just saying, I don't know how this could get worse, and you'd pick it up again and it would get worse. I mean, it's possibly the most traumatising book on this list that I've read, possibly ever. Genuinely. But the writing style is so amazing. Like, I absolutely loved the way that she writes, like the way that she describes things, turns of phrase, the imagery she uses. I immediately put reservations on all of her fiction books from the library, which will hopefully all come in soon so I can read them all. But I just thought this book was phenomenal. I'm really surprised it wasn't shortlisted. I don't know why. I have already spoken about balance and how important it is, and I'm sure that there's reasons, but it's so good. Like, so good, so good. Anyway, there are 2 books left. I think we all know what's going to be at number 1. It was predictable. It was never going to be anything else. Let's go with the number 2 book. I am surprised that this book was so high up. So, this book, you probably worked out, if you know the list, which 2 books are left and which one's going to be at number 2. But I'm going to keep you in suspense a bit longer. I did think, before the long list was announced, that this book might be on the list. It had come to my attention because it's a history book and I'm a historian, so obviously this is going to be quite high up. And it's not on the shortlist. And I'm going to explain to you the reasons why I am genuinely really disappointed that this is not on the shortlist. So the book is The Eagle and the Heart, The Tragedy of Richard II and Henry IV by Helen Castor. I will start this little mini review by saying, although this is my time period, I studied medieval history as an undergrad. This is like my time period of medieval history. The Vikings not so much, but this is very much my time period. However, I am not into royal history. I really am not interested. I kind of know a bit about the time period just because of Shakespeare. As in these 2 people, like specifically Richard II and Henry IV. I know about it thanks to Shakespeare, but I didn't know a huge amount. And when I started this book, the reservations list on the library copy was so long. So I got the audiobook of it also from the library, but the reservations was much shorter on that. And I started listening to it. And I just couldn't, because there's so many people, so many things happening. It was just overwhelming. And I could not get into it. So I paused it, waited for the physical book to come in, which took a really long time. It only came in 2 weeks ago, I think. And I started reading it, and once I'd got into it, I actually went way back to the beginning. I'd read like 3 chapters on audio, but I just didn't remember any of it. Went back to the beginning, started it again, read it really slowly. This is why I like reading non-fiction slowly. I really managed to get into it, to really understand who the different people are. The little family trees really helped as well. That was great. And then I started to switch back and forth between the audio and the physical book, depending on what I was doing. I'm not going to explain what this book is about, because it's about Richard II and Henry IV. It's just about them being kings. Richard II was king, and then Henry IV became king. Anyway, it's just about the battle between the two of them. It's about the tragedy of their lives. I thought this book was brilliant. I thought it was really engaging. It's not an easy breezy read. Like, the book is massive. It's incredibly heavy. Like, I don't have it anymore, but you could probably murder someone with it. It's an incredibly heavy book. It is so worth keeping going with it. It is amazing. But there is one thing that I just want to say, one little rant I just want to have, not about the book, but why I think this book is so important and why I think it should have been on the shortlist. I'm going to passionately try and explain why I think it should be on the shortlist. And it's less to do with the book than more to do with what it represents, which is why this is not really about the book. I do think the book is brilliant, and I loved it. I love epic history, and I love, as in, big history books that just explain it a lot, and I really like that. And I just thought Helen Caster's such a great writer, and it was just so compelling and interesting for all those reasons. That's why it's at number 2 on my list. But I think there are lots of people who say that, book awards aren't political. I mean, you're wrong. Book awards are there for a reason. They're not just about let's find a great book, but they are about saying something. And I think the Women's Prize, probably more than quite a lot of other book prizes, are about saying something. They're about championing the work of women. And I think that's really important, especially with non-fiction. This is why I was so excited when they started a non-fiction prize, because there are less non-fiction books by women published than there are by men. And not only that, but there's a really big problem, not just from readers, booksellers, librarians, and publishers. There's a really big problem with women only being allowed to publish certain kinds of non-fiction. Now, obviously, I've mentioned this several times. I'm a historian. I'm doing a PhD in history. I'm hoping one day to actually be able to publish the research that I do. And it's a very personal thing for me that I am aware that women are considered to be not allowed, because we are allowed, but not allowed, to write big epic history books. If you look at the books written by, about, say, huge time periods, or big wars, or epic battles, or powerful kings, or powerful monarchs, except the women monarchs, because women are allowed to write about women. But all of those things, they tend to be books almost predominantly written by men, and it is changing. But the fact that Helen Caster has written this big, epic, brilliantly researched, academic book, which is on a non-academic long list for a book award, which I just think is amazing that it even made it to the long list. And I would have guessed that it probably would be, because she's a brilliant writer. But this book is like proper academic research. This is great. Like, she has all the receipts of all the sort, like, everything is there. It's great. But women don't get to do stuff like this. I mean, they do, but it isn't celebrated, and it is ignored, and it is sidelined for the work of men. And I think it would have made such a brilliant statement to have such an epic, brilliant history book very prominently on a shortlist. So I'm slightly disappointed that it hasn't. Anyway, that's my little rant over with. Thanks for listening. The last book on my list, rather predictably, I thought it was going to be shortlisted. I thought it was going to be longlisted. I predicted before the long list was announced that this book would win, and that is The Story of a Heart by Rachel Clark, which is my winner. And yes, I actually do think that this will win. We'll get on to that. I have talked about this a lot because it was in my top books of last year when I read it. I'll drop a link below to that video if you haven't seen it. But this is the story of 2 children about 2 9-year-olds in Britain, Kira and Max. Kira suffered a catastrophic brain injury in a road traffic accident, and Max needed a heart transplant. And normally we wouldn't know about donors of organs. It's kept very, very secret for very, very good reasons. But because Max's family were trying to publicise the need for more donors and more people to consider donating their loved ones' organs after their death, they did a lot of publicity. And it coincided with when Kira died. And so Kira's family kind of put two and two together, reached out via the newspaper that was telling Max's story, and they were able to connect, which is why Rachel Clark was able to write the story about these two families. Rachel Clark is a palliative care doctor in the NHS, and I think that this book really, like, her compassion for people, and not just for Kira and for Max and their families, although that's very, very important in the story, but her compassion for absolutely everybody in the story really, really shines through. But also her passion for the NHS really shines through. Our absolutely amazing free at the point of use healthcare system, which is a bit of a shambles at the moment. But anyway, her love for that and her passion for maintaining that kind of service free at the point of use really, really, I think, shines through in this story because of how much compassion she shows to the various different people in this story. She tells you everyone's story, not just Kira, Max and their families, but everyone from witnesses to the horrific accident, to the paramedics, to the nurses and the doctors, to surgeons, to people who work in the donor system and organised transplant, like everybody. Everyone gets to tell their story, and it is incredibly deeply moving. It is very, very sad. I do think ultimately it's very uplifting. I generally don't cry very often. I did cry at an episode of Doctor Who the other day, but I'm not generally a weeper. It was an episode about Rose's dad. I shouldn't have watched it, but I don't cry very often at anything because I'm dead inside. But there was a scene where Kira's dad is watching her heart being taken away in an ambulance. Oh my god, that really I did me in. I had to stop reading for a good couple of days. I was very emotional. It's an incredibly sad book, but I think ultimately it is incredibly uplifting. Like, it is very hopeful, and I think it's very life affirming, which seems strange to say about this particular story, but I think when you get to the end of it, what you get is this really life affirming story, the importance of organ donation and the importance of love. Really, it's such a beautiful story, and that's why I think it's my winner. And I still think it's going to. I said it before the long list was announced. I still hold it true. If The Story of a Heart doesn't win, I'm going to be so shocked. Like, you message me on Thursday evening when we find out the winner, because I would be so shocked if this doesn't win. Would I be disappointed in the judges? I don't want to be all petulant and be like, I think he should, pick the book that I want to pick, but this book just says so much about, I think, the world that we live in, the society that we live in, and how much we care or don't care for other people, and how much we should care, and how much we should care about our healthcare system and how important it is and what impact it can have on people's lives. And I just think it says so much about Britain, and it's written by a brilliant doctor, and I just think it's an incredibly important story. And I will be really surprised if it doesn't win. Shook. She will be shook. So that is my thoughts. This is, I think, turned into a very long video. I'm very sorry, but I had a lot of books to talk about. And I would love to know if you've read all of them, which is your favourite. If you have only read some of them, what was your favourite out of those, and which other ones do you want to read? Have I convinced you to read any books? Do you disagree with me? Feel free to let me know all of your thoughts in the comments below. I am really excited to find out who wins on Thursday. I think there's also a fiction award happening at the same time, but non-fiction's better. So, controversial opinion. Okay, thank you very much for watching. I'm going to stop there. Please do join me very soon for another video, and have a great day, whatever you're doing, wherever you are, or evening. I'm going to stop now. Thank you for watching.